During my high school days, I had two close friends, Jason and Brian, and we often hung out together. However, after graduation, Jason's family had to relocate to Lexington, South Carolina, because of his father's work. A while after the move, Brian and I were invited to visit Jason for a weekend at his new house. While there, we decided to explore the nearby forest and countryside, where we discovered a scenic river. The area was stunning and had a serene atmosphere, but we unintentionally got lost. With no sounds of civilization within earshot, we chose to follow the river, unable to determine if we were headed upstream or downstream. As time passed, we began to worry about finding a phone to contact Jason's parents and locate our way back, despite the absence of a paved road or street. Eventually, we stumbled upon an old building constructed with ancient red bricks that looked like a church. The building had a dirt parking lot and a dirt road leading up to it. The area was heavily overgrown with bushes, so we decided to explore and see if there were any people nearby who could help us with directions or lend us a phone. Upon approaching, we noticed several old, dirty cars from the 70s or 80s, all white and parked in a row with flat or missing tires. Gospel music and singing could be heard emanating from the dilapidated church, and as we entered, we saw a few dozen poorly dressed individuals gathered in the hall. The pianist, an elderly woman with glasses, stopped playing upon seeing us. However, what happened next was unforgettable. Everyone in the church stopped singing and turned to stare at us with vacant, unwelcoming expressions. Jason apologized for interrupting and asked to use their phone, but no one responded. In an eerie silence, we retreated out the door, feeling a sense of fear and apprehension. As we began walking up the dirt road, we realized that there were no Christian symbols inside the church. When we looked back, a group of around a dozen men had gathered in front of the church, watching us closely as we sprinted away in fear for what felt like half an hour. Eventually, we stumbled upon a dilapidated gas station that appeared to be one of those old-fashioned full-service stations. Upon entering, we noticed that the shelves were mostly bare and coated in a layer of dust. An aged, overly tanned man with an oily and grimy baseball cap sat behind the counter, absorbed in a weathered book with yellowed pages and frayed edges. He glanced up and queried, "You boys lost, huh?" before directing us to exit the way we entered, take a left, and follow the road until we reached a telephone pole. Once we located the pole, he instructed us to turn right and follow the trail, which would eventually lead us to a highway. After thanking the man, we departed hastily. As we journeyed towards the telephone pole, we cast a glance over our shoulders and saw the old man standing in front of the gas station with his arms folded, sporting a toothy, rotten grin. We reached the pole, turned right, and trekked down the trail until we eventually reached the nearest highway after approximately 30 minutes of walking in the dim twilight. By the time we arrived, darkness had enveloped us, and we attempted to flag down a few passing motorists, but to no avail. Fortunately, a police officer noticed us and pulled over to offer assistance. We informed him of our lost status and provided Jason's address. Upon hearing this, he whistled and confirmed our lost condition. After a 30-minute ride with the officer back to Jason's, we engaged in small talk during which he advised us to be cautious while in the woods due to the presence of eccentric witch individuals. Approximately 8 years ago, my two friends, James and Sean, and I engaged in a foolish activity. Although we no longer associate with James, Sean and I frequently reminisce about this event. We used to participate in reckless behavior as a form of entertainment. When we were 19 years old, we resided in Bumfuck, New Jersey, a town with numerous vacant houses. Not far from our homes, atop a hilly road, stood an abandoned church that was well known to the locals. The church was situated on a closed-off road and had been deserted for several years. I am uncertain about its current condition as I now reside in Florida. However, being the troublemaking thrill-seekers we were, my friends James, Sean, and I came up with a brilliant plan to visit the church one night with a Ouija board, given that it was October and spooky season. Sean had the Ouija board in his closet, so he brought it along. As I was the driver, I picked up James first, followed by Sean, and drove straight towards the church. Since the road to the church was blocked off, we had to park on the side of the road and walk from there. Initially, we used only one flashlight to avoid drawing attention, but once we reached the top of the hill, we turned on all 3 flashlights. The church was surrounded by woods on all sides and had a gravel parking lot next to it. The church had been broken into several times before and was covered in graffiti, so the large front door was already ajar. It was challenging to open it completely since it scraped on the floor, and 2 of us had to work together to do so. Upon entering, we instinctively scanned the surroundings with our flashlights to ensure no one else was present. The atmosphere was undeniably eerie, given the late hour and the location we were in. Sean produced an Ouija board and retrieved 3 candles from his backpack, jokingly stating that it would enhance the experience. He arranged the candles in a triangular pattern around the board and lit them, prompting us to switch off our flashlights. The candles cast a dim light, creating an even more unsettling ambience, with visibility limited to a mere 6 feet in all directions. We proceeded to use the Ouija board, with Sean leading the conversation. While I cannot recall his precise words, he began by asking the typical, cliched questions such as, "Is anybody there?" As the planchette began to move, laughter erupted from our group. I suspected that one of my friends was playing a prank, as it seemed impossible to use a Ouija board without someone playfully moving the planchette. Despite our suspicions, we played along as whoever was moving it spelled out a few words. However, as we continued, we suddenly heard a strange cracking sound emanating from the church altar. It was a loud noise, like the sound of a large piece of wood snapping in half, and it seemed to have been caused by someone. All of us were startled and quickly shone our phone flashlights in the direction of the altar, but there was no one there that we could see. The experience left us all feeling unnerved, although we rationalized that the old, dilapidated state of the building could have caused unusual sounds. We continued to use the Ouija board by taking turns asking questions, but it appeared that the planchette had stopped moving, likely due to the crack sound that had startled us earlier. Our demeanor had become more serious, and we remained in this state for quite some time. Suddenly, we heard another noise coming from the altar area, which broke the silence once again. Before we could even direct our flashlights in that direction, a golf ball-sized rock landed on the board, causing all of us to scream and jump. We had all just had our hands on the planchette, so it was impossible for any of us to have thrown the rock. We panicked and fled the church, leaving behind the Ouija board and candles. As we ran down the hill, we feared we were being pursued and did not stop until we reached my car. Once we arrived at James's house, we sat in the car for a long time, discussing what had just occurred and trying to make sense of it all. It is worth noting that Sean, who is both religious and superstitious, was among us. Although he was confident we had reached a spirit of some kind, I personally don't believe in such paranormal phenomena. However, I find the possibility of someone else being present in the church equally terrifying. The day after our visit, Sean and James returned to retrieve Sean's Ouija board, but to their surprise, it was missing while the candles remained in their original positions. Upon discovering the board's absence, they quickly decided to leave. To this day, this remains the most frightening experience of my life. This incident occurred in Warren County, Georgia, a rural inland area of the state that my girlfriend Marissa and I were exploring as a potential new place to live. The quiet and spacious surroundings appealed to us, and as Roman Catholics, we occasionally attend church services. However, Marissa is more devout than I am. On a quiet weekday afternoon, we explored the area to determine whether it would be a suitable place to live. Marissa, who has been an equestrian for most of her life, was particularly interested in finding a rural area with a barn for her horses. While driving past a small, charming church situated on a tranquil road, we noticed a parking lot full of cars. Marissa suggested we check it out and see if there was a mass taking place. We parked beside an old red minivan in the dirt-like lot and made our way to the church entrance. The majority of cars in the parking lot appeared to be quite old, leading Marissa to speculate that it was a lower-income area. Upon entering the church, we were met with a cozy and small interior as we had anticipated. The nave was flanked by 5 rows of pews, each cut in half, and we estimated around 20 people were present. Surprisingly, most of the congregation appeared to be in their 30s or 40s rather than the typical senior crowd one would expect to see at a church service. The room was silent as everyone appeared to be in prayer, and Marissa and I sat down at the back of the church. As we sat down, we noticed the individuals closest to us begin to glance our way, one after the other. As more people caught on to the staring, they too began to turn and observe us. Marissa and I exchanged glances, before nervously returning the gaze. We attempted to break the ice by smiling at our fellow worshippers, but our efforts were met with blank stares, and no one smiled back. The stares we received were extremely unwelcoming, and it suddenly dawned on me that none of the individuals in the room were dressed appropriately for a church service. I couldn't help but wonder what was happening. It was then that I noticed there wasn't a single woman in the room, except for Marissa, who was standing on the stairs. The people seemed to be staring more intently at Marissa than at me. Suddenly, a man wearing a mask and standing at the front of what was supposed to be the altar, spoke up and asked who had invited us to be there. Taking charge, I answered on behalf of both of us and explained that we were just passing by and noticed that a mass was taking place, so we decided to join. It was clear that the man was not a priest, and that the church was not Roman Catholic. He then ordered us to leave immediately. By this point, every single person in the church was staring at us. I turned to my companion and said, "Let's go, honey." And we got up and hurried out and ran to the car. We wasted no time sitting in the car. I got us out of that parking lot right away. But we both noticed in the rearview mirror someone from the building getting in their van in the parking lot. I felt like there was no way they were going to follow us until we saw that gray van catching up to us in the mirror. I had Marissa GPS the Warren County Sheriff's Office, and we drove straight there. The van was behind us the whole time, not on our ass, but close enough that it was obvious. The second we pulled into the public safety parking lot, the van kept driving down the road. When it was gone, we simply drove straight home and never looked at Warren County again. We clearly ended up in some kind of cult meeting, but I don't get why they had someone follow us, nor why they were having their meeting in broad daylight, or why they didn't at least lock the door. When I was a Cub Scout, we would always have our meetings somewhere in a Catholic elementary school, whether it was in the school gym or in one of the adjacent rooms. When I was around 8 years old, something happened that left me feeling disturbed. However, before I delve into the details, let me start from the beginning. A few days prior, my mother, brother, and I attended Mass, as we did every other week. Due to our tardiness, we often had to either stand by the doors or sit in the back. On this particular day, we managed to find seats all the way in the back corner. My mother and brother entered the pew before I did, and I took the seat at the end. At some point during the Mass, I noticed an elderly man with glasses and a white mustache standing against the wall to my left, staring at me. As I looked over, he flashed a smile, but his attempt at being funny came off as stupid and creepy. Although I was only 8 years old, I knew something wasn't right, and I felt uncomfortable. I tried to look away, but every few seconds, he would glance in my direction. I glanced back, and once again, he made another weird face that I assumed was an attempt at humor, but it only made me feel weirder. My mother noticed his behavior and tapped me on the shoulder, whispering for me to ignore him. She also gave him a dirty look. The man eventually left his spot and walked away, and I thought that was the end of it. The next thing I remember from that Mass was going up for communion. As I returned to my seat, I saw the man had returned to the same spot and was once again staring at me with a smile on his face. His behavior made me feel uneasy, and my mother noticed it again. After receiving communion, we immediately left. On the way out, my mother expressed her discomfort with the way a certain individual was looking at us, specifically me. Later, during one of our scout meetings, we engaged in a scavenger hunt. This was typically done towards the end of the meetings and involved fun contests or games. The theme of the scavenger hunt revolved around scouting, with items on the list including a first aid kit, a rope, and a flashlight. We were divided into 2 teams, and each team was provided with a copy of the list. The objective was to find as many items as possible, with the team that found the most being declared the winner. The play area encompassed the gym, the cafeteria, and adjacent rooms, so we split up accordingly. I frantically searched unfamiliar rooms and narrow hallways in a desperate attempt to locate the items on my list. Despite my efforts, I had little success until I stumbled upon a cramped corridor at the rear of the cafeteria, adjacent to the kitchen. A fridge filled with ice pops caught my attention, and I scanned its contents, hoping to find something from my list. However, when I failed to find any suitable items, I surreptitiously took one of the pops. Suddenly, a man's voice startled me from behind, and I recognized him as the same man from the church I had seen a few days earlier. He smiled and advised me to conceal my actions, then he closed the fridge door and took hold of my hand, leading me towards a secluded area in the back of the building. I quickly broke free from his grasp and attempted to leave, but he firmly seized my wrist and urged me to calm down. Fearing for my safety, I screamed for help, causing him to release me and command me to stop. Terrified, I ran to the gym and recounted the incident to the cub master, who promptly informed my mother. Fortunately, the cub master was kind and caring, and he promised to assist my mother in reporting the incident to the church. It later emerged that the man was an employee of the church, living on its premises. Disturbingly, allegations emerged that he had inappropriately touched an altar boy. It sickens me to think about what might have happened to me had I followed him to the secluded area. While I am uncertain of his fate, I do know that the church severed ties with him following the incident.